What's going on, everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at an ultra tiny gaming PC that should be able to put down the power given the specs we have here. And this is known as the MX-RTX36. Well, it probably goes by other names because this is one of those AliExpress mini PCs that you can pick up, but you will see other sellers using these with different names, maybe even adding a little bit of RGB, a couple stickers here and there. We've seen this happen with other mini PCs across the internet, but the biggest reason I want to pick this up were obviously the internal specs and the form factor. Not much else comes along with this mini PC. We get a little bit of hardware, some rubber feet, and a 230 watt power supply. Now we've got a lot to test here, and I definitely want to get into some real gaming with this machine. But before we jump over there, I do want to mention that this video is sponsored by Urcdkeys. I've been using this site for a long time. They offer Steam keys, Uplay, Ubisoft, but the main thing I usually pick up over here are Windows 10 Pro OEM keys. And right now, if you use code ETA, you can get 25% off, bringing the price down to $17 for that key. And keep in mind, this will also work with Microsoft Office products. We'll use code ETA. As you can see, brought it down to that $17 price mark. Personally, I use PayPal just to have that security, so we'll go ahead and check out. They're going to email that code to you, and now we can use that code to activate Windows 10 Pro. I'm going to head over to my updates and security. We're going to go to activation. As you can see, I've got Windows 10 Pro, but it's not activated. So I'm going to change product key. I'm going to paste it in here, choose next, choose activate, and Windows is now activated. We're ready to go. They'll email your code once your payment is processed, and that's basically it. If you're interested in picking up cheap Windows 10 keys for your new PC builds, I'll leave a link in the description. Taking a look at the overall unit, up front here, we've got our power button and two full-size USB 2.0 ports. Unfortunately, these are not 3.0 ports. We do have some around back, and we'll get to that in a second. But we've also got this strip up front, which will light up blue. It's not RGB, it's just a single color there. And around back, we've got our power input for that 230 watt power supply, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, 4 more USB 2.0 ports, 2 full-size USB 3.2 ports, dual full-size HDMI. It's also got a headphone jack, microphone jack, and USB-C 3.2. So in total, we can actually do 3 displays out utilizing that USB 3.2 and both of those HDMI ports. I was hoping they added Thunderbolt here, but unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's got it. One thing I thought that was really interesting was this can support 4G. We've got a SIM card slot down here on the bottom, but the unit that I have did not come with the cell module. So you will need to add one of those if you wanted to add 4G to this unit. Not sure how many people would do that. When it comes to the overall construction, half of this is full metal. So it's actually an aluminum base here, which will allow it to kind of extract a little more heat. Top half is plastic, and right in between there, we've got that little bit of a LED lighting system. We can pull this right off with 4 screws and access the internals. And if we take a look right down here, this is where that 4G module would go if you wanted to add one. And this did come to me bare bones, but what I did here was add a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD. It's actually a Gen 3, but this does support up to a Gen 4. And I also added 32 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM running at 4800 megahertz. With this unit, we do get a dedicated GPU and a pretty powerful CPU. It's got a dual fan cooling system. The base is copper and it's raised up just a bit, as you can see here. And there's 2 different contact plates, one for the CPU die and one for the GPU die. And speaking of that CPU and GPU, this is actually powered by the Intel Core i7-12700H. 14 cores, 20 threads, 6 performance cores up to 4.7 GHz, and 8 efficiency cores up to 3.5. With that cooling system, I'm really wondering what kind of TDP this is running at. But with this, we can also add up to 64 gigabytes of SODIMM RAM running at 4800 megahertz. And this actually has an Nvidia RTX 3060 with 12 gigabytes of GDDR6 VRAM. I was actually under the impression that this would be the 6 gig 3060, but from everything that I'm seeing in Windows, we've got 12 gigs of GDDR6, which is really awesome. Now, it's not going to make it any faster than the 6, but we've got more RAM here for games that really need it. We can also add up to a 4 terabyte M.2 SSD, and I'm going to be running Windows 11 Pro on this machine. Alright, so far everything's been working pretty well here. As you can see, we've got that i7-12700H, 32 gigs of DDR5, and of course that RTX 3060. It's a laptop variant because we're working with that small form factor. Basically, what a lot of these manufacturers have been doing is just using laptop parts, and we've got 12 gigs of VRAM with the RTX 3060. I was actually under the impression that this was going to have 6 gigs, so yeah, I mean, lucked out there. Another thing I wanted to check out was just the overall TDP on the CPU, given the cooler situation. It is a smaller cooler for this i7, and it looks like we've got a boost up to 45. Now, this chip can do up to 80. We could probably change it from the BIOS, but I'm going to leave it just like this. I think it dropped down to 35 here. Yeah, so we've got that boost up to 45, and while gaming will probably be there. But the next thing I wanted to check out was the GPU TGP, and it looks like we've got that 80-watt variant of the RTX 3060. So in total, I mean, 45 watts there, 80 on the GPU. This cooler could probably handle it. Those fans might spin up a little more than I'd like, but the next thing I wanted to take a look at were some GPU benchmarks. We're using 3D Mark, and I always like running Night Raid just to kind of get a baseline for other lower-end systems. Looking at a score of over 42,000. Firestrike coming in with a 17,285. And finally, we've got TimeSpy with a 7,474. Graphics score is right there at 7,102. So yeah, with that 80-watt variant of the RTX 3060, it is putting down some pretty good GPU power, given that it's still only an RTX 3060. Now, we could have definitely scored a bit higher in each one of these if we could take the TDP up on that CPU, but given the limited cooler that we have here, 45 watts is going to be the sweet spot. Now it's time to check out some PC gaming on this, because in my opinion, this is what it's all about. And here we have Helldivers 2. On the initial drop-in, had a lot of bugs around. I forgot to hit record until we were basically done. We were seeing an average of around 72 FPS with this game. Not too bad, and right now we're not using any DLSS. Remember, with the RTX 3060, we've got full access to DLSS, which is really going to improve performance. But with most of this stuff, I tried not to use DLSS, even though it's one of my favorite technologies. Either way, there were a few we did have to hit it up a little bit. But the next one we have here is PALWORLD 1080p. High setting, we're seeing an average of around 88 FPS, and I suspected we'd see some pretty good performance here, given that we've got that Nvidia GPU. Spiderman Remastered, also going to see the same kind of performance with Spider-Man Miles Morales, 1080p, very high, up in the hundreds. We actually had an average of 111 FPS with this game. And yeah, I mean, it does look really good here. And I really did think about testing a few of these games at 1440p, but we're on that 3060. And in my opinion, it is kind of a very high or maybe high 1080p card. Going up to 1440 is possible, but then you will need to enable a lot of DLSS. I always like throwing at least one fighting game in, so I went with Mortal Kombat 1, 1080p, high settings, and I probably should have just taken this up to Ultra. We do get a couple dips down to 59 with Afterburner, but that's something you really never notice. It feels good like this, and again, I probably should have just maxed it out. Here's Shadow of the Tomb Raider, just using the built-in benchmark. High, 1080p, had an average of 129 FPS. I also went with the benchmark for Red Dead Redemption 2, and I did enable DLSS here. We're actually at balanced with it, but when running this game on the 3060, I would suggest taking DLSS to performance. Either way, we had an average of 66, maximum of 138, and a minimum of 29. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, 1080p, DLSS set to balance. We had an average of 109 and a low of 88. And the final game we have here is Cyberpunk 2077, and this one also needed a little bit of DLSS since we're using high settings here on the RTX 3060. 1080p, high, looking decent, getting an average of around 75 FPS. Another thing I wanted to talk about here was total system power consumption, and since we've got that dedicated GPU, it's a lot higher than the other mini PCs we usually take a look at. But while doing my testing, I've got this plugged into a kilowatt meter, and at idle, we're around 19 watts. Average gaming jumps up to 142 watts, and the maximum that I could get this to pull while maxing out all of the cores and the GPU was 187 watts. Remember, this does come along with a 230 watt power supply, so we're well below that. And the final thing here was that maximum CPU temperature after all of my testing. It's at 45 watts, so if we went any higher, we could definitely hit thermal throttle, but through all of the games that I tested, we only hit 89 degrees Celsius. Now this is set to thermal throttle at 92 from the BIOS, so we're under that limit, but it is getting kind of close even at 45 watts. Overall, given the form factor, I think we're seeing some really great gaming performance, but I do wish there was a better cooler. Now, I did go back, run this at 65 watts, and yeah, we can get better CPU performance for a little while, but it will thermal throttle pretty quickly. And given that that is basically a combined CPU and GPU heatsink, it will affect the temperature of the GPU. So yeah, having just a bigger block on this thing would be really nice. But unfortunately, this is the only configuration I could find it in. And if you're interested in learning a little more, I will leave some links in the description. You can pick this up over on AliExpress. There's a bunch of different models. They've got different cases. But when you see something with, let's say, that 12700H and the RTX 3060, you're basically getting the same board in a different case. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you've got any questions or you want to see anything else running on this mini gaming PC, just let me know in the comments. And like always, thanks for watching.